Okay. Hello, AMICAL, and welcome to today's virtual forum, Strategies for Teaching About Fake News. This is Chris Furno coming to you from the American University of Sharjah. Today's forum is brought to you by the AMICAL group, our Information Literacy Committee members, Livia, Michael, Tadevik, Krasi, and myself. Thank you for joining me and our presenters. Before we start, I wanted to review just a few things. We have two presenters today speaking for a short period of time. At the moment, we're going to have the questions come at the end of both presentations, so we'll finish the presentations and then start looking at questions. But this is subject to change. We'll see. We're recording the event, and we'll be sending you a link to the recording sometime soon, I hope. And before we get started, is there anything the committee members want to add or announce, review?
No, I'm good. I have nothing to add. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, I'll get started with our introduction for our first presenter. Joining us from the American University of Beirut is Jasmina Najjar. Jasmina is a communication skills instructor, program coordinator, copywriter, journalist, and author. She's very busy. She's a member of AMICAL's Digital Pedagogy Committee. Jasmina, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you. We're looking forward to hearing from you. So I think there we go.
Hi, I'm going to actually share a presentation with people. So just let me do the screen share thing, one sec, and we will get started. All right, so I'm going to be actually focusing on the teaching side rather than the library information session that we give students. So I'm going to be sharing two different writing assignments that I did with my students that reinforce the kind of information literacy skills and awareness about fake news. And it honestly all began with a comment that one of my students said in class that really made me start to think, do students really know how to identify fake news in an era, that can arguably be considered the post-truth era? And then a follow-up question emerged over the course of the semesters, which is, how can information literacy on fake news be reinforced in the writing classroom through the process of writing in different ways, in different levels, while meeting different course requirements? And I think this is actually quite key. So what I did was I tailored assignments for courses. The first was in spring 2016-2017, and it was for my advanced academic writing course. And I designed an argumentative essay assignment about fake news. And at that time, I joined forces with one of our wonderful librarians, who is Nabila Shahabuddin. And she basically prepared a presentation for students, introducing them to the CRAP test and various other things that they would need to help them identify fake news. And I actually shared information about this assignment last year at AMICAL 2017. And in fall 2017-2018, I designed a particular assignment for my enrichment and English course, which invited students to illustrate what fake news is by creating fake news. I'm going to be sharing more details about that in the upcoming AMICAL 2018. So pop by, say hi, and I'll tell you more. So basically for the English 204 assignment, I started off by getting students to try to figure out how informed they were about the fake news that was going viral. So I went through a test that I have found on The Guardian, which is, can you spot the real fake news story? And I asked them, so which of these conspiracy-laced fake news headlines caused a stir? I'm going to let you think for a minute just to see if you can identify the correct one. I'm going to reveal the answer now. So that was the actual fake news story. And the whole quiz, I gave students about 12 questions. It really made students realize that they weren't as up to date as they thought. But what about actually identifying fake news itself, rather than just being aware of which fake news is, going around at the moment? And I thought, what could be done to increase information literacy and alert students to concerns surrounding fake news? And so for English 204, I got them to write an argumentative essay on a rather broad topic, which is fake news. And I shared with them an image and 2 articles to kind of get them started. And then I challenged them to, from this broad topic, select a more narrowed down topic and come up with a clear argumentative thesis statement, a claim, to do more research accordingly, and to decide whether they wanted to opt for a more classical argument or a Rogerian argument. And then they had to obviously, document everything and have proper in-text citation, etc. Now, this was the image that I shared with students because I really wanted them to start to think, when we talk about fake news, do we really mean biased news? What is the real definition of fake news? And I actually prompted them to then go on to define what fake news is. And these are the 2 articles that I shared with them. So basically, they then had a session with our wonderful librarian, and in it, she was kind enough to share questions on new social media and fake news tips to spot fake news and various fact-checking tools. When the students narrowed down their topics, they came up with many diverse, topics, such as, this was one that students were completely obsessed with for some reason. Fake news did or fake news did not have an impact on the US elections. Others were exploring fake news and the war in Syria. Others chose to argue that fake news has always been around and is not a new phenomenon. Others focused on the misleading nutritional advice, etc. Students then did a guided peer review, and it was really an opportunity for students to interact and discuss various aspects of fake news and its impact, and to also identify whether or not sources used in essays were credible, hence reinforcing these information literacy skills. Now, at the time, after the assignment, I asked students to give me feedback. And as you can see from the slide that I was sharing, students found it to be quite an eye-opening experience, and they felt that it did, in fact, teach them about fake news, which is, I think, quite good. It actually achieved the main objective. Now, this year, last semester, for my English, this year as an academic year, I invited my English 102 students to a library session, during which the librarian was again kind enough to give them a library session on fake news. In addition to that, I shared with them various examples of fake news so that they could see what it looked like. And then students had to illustrate what fake news is by creating their own fake news. And the fake news stories really had to exemplify the telltale signs of fake news, sound believable enough, and follow the conventions of fake news and fulfill the purpose of fake news. And their stories range from everything from fake economic news to fake entertainment news. And the fake news was actually framed with an intro that defines fake news, in addition to highlighting the prominence or impact of fake news. And then after their fake news story, they had to have, a solid explanation of analysis of how their fake news stories illustrate the telltale signs of fake news. So in other words, students were combining what we call pastiche writing with basic research to create an illustration or example essay. And peer review was done, and then students were informally surveyed after they submitted their final draft. These are some examples of students' fake news. This particular student opted for health and fitness fake news, want to get a shredded body, and he continues his fake news story. And they even had to create pretend URLs, etc. This is another example. Kim Kardashian attacked by supposedly extinct animal while on vacation in Africa. From bestcelebnews101.com.co. Now, for the feedback that I got from students, when I asked them, did the assignment help you learn about fake news? 69.57% said yes, definitely. Whereas 30.43% said to a certain extent, but no student said not at all. When I asked them, did this assignment improve your ability to identify fake news? 95.65% said it did, whereas only 4.35% said that it did not. And when I asked them that, okay, so this assignment involves creating fake news and doing research about fake news, but which part helped you learn more about identifying fake news? Now here, it's quite interesting in that 52% said it was the research component, whereas 8.70% said it was creating fake news. And the combination of both together benefited 39%. So I feel that this is actually quite telling. When I asked them if they knew a lot about how to identify fake news before the assignment, about 74% said they knew a little bit about how to identify fake news before the assignment, but not really in detail. Whereas 22% said that they didn't know how to identify fake news before the assignment. Now, vis-a-vis the feedback that I got, some students said that mimicking the writing style of fake news showed me how others create such news through deception. Others showed how tone and exaggeration are as important as the information in the texts. Others saw the impact that writing has on the reader, etc. You can see all of the feedback here. And I really think that, yes, I mean, there are algorithms that target the spread of fake news. We've got, software being developed. We've got trained, fact-checking specialists. But it's still really important to really empower students with these key information literacy skills. And also, I think it's really important, not only for librarians to be at the forefront of this, but I think we faculty members need to also take initiative and to find ways of reinforcing information literacy in our own classrooms by thinking about assignments that are really tailored to our course learning objectives, to the level of our students, and to find ways of engaging students through the content. Thank you. And let me get rid of my screen share.
Excellent. Thank you, Jasmina.
Thank you.
That was very interesting. I really enjoyed that. Very short and cute presentation. I have a couple of questions already, but I think we said we wanted to go ahead maybe with Livia and Tara, if Tara, she already is.
Tara is not here yet, so we can maybe just make some comments about Jasmina's presentation.
Okay. Does anybody have a question already? Anybody wants to jump in?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you want I was just curious if you have any for the future, based on your experience. Do you have things you're going to change, update, try a little differently, or are you happy with the approach that you've tried already?
I think I would try a few things differently. For example, I think that, you know, even though, let's say when I challenged my students to write fake news and I shared links with them, etc., of fake news, many of them later on when I did a course reflection revealed that they felt they would have liked to have more guidance, etc. So I think I'd actually do that in the classroom. Actually share a couple of fake news stories with them, break it down, as opposed to say, okay, these are examples with the breakdown, you know, go do that kind of thing. So I think I'd actually bring it into the classroom, create a discussion about that, maybe do a few exercises where they try to mimic that in class before getting them to do that writing part. But I found it really eye-opening that they found that the research was more beneficial than the actual pastiche writing.
Okay.
The other assignment, because it was mainly research-based, the argumentative essay. So I really think that, you know, you can't just focus on doing like a fun creative exercise. You need to really bridge it with research.
Okay. Just one more quick question, I think quick. Do you mind, or do you have a sense or a memory of the discussions you had with your librarian as you were approaching this assignment? What are some of the highlights that you would have put forth?
Okay, so what we did is I had a chat because at AUB, you know, we always, for our communication skills courses, for each course, we always take our students to the library and the librarian gives them a really interesting session, introducing them, you know, to relevant databases, to relevant research practices, etc., that are tailored for each course. And we integrated the fake news component into the regular information literacy session. I think in the future, I'd like to do one that's the regular one and then one that's just dedicated to fake news, just so that, you know, it doesn't fall under the radar, so to speak.
Sure, yeah.
And I think you know, during our discussions, we really thought about, you know, what would be, we didn't want to overwhelm students with too much information, but at the same time, we didn't want them not to have enough to have that kind of awareness.
Yeah.
So we really talked about striking a balance. And in fact, what the librarian went ahead and did after, you know, she prepared all the material for my class, she shared it on AUB's website.
Nice.
To the library, so that now, you know, everyone can benefit from these resources.
Absolutely. Thank you.
One comment, if we still have time, to what Jasmina just said. It would be interesting and in line with the collaboration with librarian and that information literacy part that of course exists for every one of us to empower. It would be really interesting to test, to say so, students in this application of new knowledge, new understanding of fake news. That would be really amazing to try and somehow incorporate. Of course, that's not easy and may even require that in the next course you would have to somehow deal with it. But yeah, important, absolutely important discussion, and something for all of us to keep adding. And another thing you mentioned about the research, I think they may have find it so important because our students who are constantly surrounded by information, they forget that everything is to be, how to say, like you stop and you elaborate on what you are accepting or receiving as information. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah. What's interesting at AUB, during the library sessions, we have a pre-test and a post-test, but it's for that particular library session. So I'll definitely suggest to the library if they can add a few extra questions about fake news. I think that can be, you know, quite interesting, because we already do that to make sure that students are learning these, you know, best practices when it comes to, you know, searching journals, being more aware about, you know, Boolean searches, etc., etc. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Michael, did you want to add?
No, I think, no. Let's go with Tara, and then like this, we see how much time we have at the end. And so I keep my questions maybe for later. So I'm going to give more all to you, Chris, and then to Tara.
Yes, I just have a few introductory notes. Tara Keenan Thompson specializes in teaching composition and research methods, excuse me. She has taught history, politics, sociology, writing, and research methods in Ireland, New York, and now Italy. Currently, she teaches composition and directs the Writing Center at John Cabot University. Thank you for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm not sure, because I was teaching, I'm not sure what you talked about in the first session, but I want to talk a little bit about the Stanford study. Did you get a chance to talk about the Stanford study at all?
No, I think.
No.
Okay, great, that's fine. So the way I usually, the way I tried to do it this term with fake news was not introduce the topic at all. And then what I did was I put together this, this slideshow using this, this study that Stanford put together about people in their, you know, college students looking at fake news and kind of falling for it. So I don't introduce the topic at all. I don't ever mention fake news until I do this lesson to try and, you know, have some impact. So the first thing I show them is, I show them this Instagram post, and we look at it, and I ask them, does this provide strong evidence about the conditions near the Fukushima power plant? This actually requires me to tell them what happened, because a lot of them don't know about the Fukushima disaster. And so I do a little bit about that, and then I say, is this good evidence? And so this is how, this is the PowerPoint I show them. Are the images faked? And so actually the answer is no, they're not fake. But they're just mutated daisies. This is a phenomenon that happens. So then I ask them, you know, kind of what do they need to know about the image? We look at the image together, Instagram, and I start to bring in the results of the Stanford study, use this image, and you know that 40% of students were surveyed said yes, it provided good evidence for the plant.
Tara, I have a quick question, Tara. Do you want to share actually your PowerPoint, or should I share the PowerPoint?
I thought I was sharing.
Yes.
I don't see it, but maybe it's only me.
No, we don't see it.
Okay, sorry.
Just like to, okay.
Can you see it now?
Okay, yeah. So right now we're on slide 3, that's correct? Yeah.
Yes.
I want to show you the first slide again.
Yeah, so there's like...
Okay, so that's what I show them. And so they get a look at it, we talk about it. Then I ask them if it's fake. No, I show them, you know, a little bit of the Stanford study. Then I talk about how Stanford decided that less than 20% of students could accurately assess the photo. And we talk about things like clicking on the link, because if you notice the link here, please Google blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's basically an Instagram post to get people to click on a link that will bring them to somebody else saying something else. So the students are usually pretty floored by this point that they fell for it. Then we look at another, a thing that they probably see all the time, but what, in an international setting, you know, I'm teaching at an American university, so I use a lot of American sources, but what was important during the lesson was to define what move on was, because some people didn't know what move on was, some people didn't know what the NRA was. So we talked about that. We tried to apply the lessons from the first, the Daisy photograph and Instagram post. We tried to apply those lessons to this and see what we could get. So it was assessing the tweet. Yes, it's a real tweet. So the source is listed on the lower right, okay? We talked about, you know, what is NRA, what is out of touch, because that's idiomatic, okay? So I needed to explain that. What is move on? So then the question is this tweet useful? And why might this be, you know, a good source to use? Okay, so I get them to, you know, this is something that very few students can get in class, so I've got to bring them to the issue of that it's a professional polling firm, and ask them, you know, how would they know it's a professional polling firm? And then why might it not be useful? So then we talk a little bit about sources and how sometimes they're useful for one thing and not useful for another thing. And when you have a politically motivated source, what the problems are with that. Okay. Then we look at a home page. Now, can I make it bigger? Okay. Sorry it's blurry, but this is the best I could get. But this is Slate's homepage, okay? And we looked at these three areas. The first one is the Gotham Writers advertisement. They can pretty much figure out that it's an advertisement. Then this next one, should California stop growing almonds? And I read them the little blurb there. It's got a writer and that kind of thing. And then the third one, the real reasons women don't go into tech-sponsored content. Okay, so how do I go? Oh, okay, so we talk about what's a good source, what's sponsored content, so that we can talk and talk about the different synonyms for that, and how is this different from news. And then I go back to the Stanford study. 80% of students believe that the native advertisement was a real news story. 80%. So that's quite important. So then we kind of wrap up looking at a checklist and talk about each thing on the checklist. Watch the all caps, too many pop-ups, check the domain. Watch for .co at the end, because that could be a problem. Google the name of the site with fake next to it and see what comes up if you're unsure. Follow their links without getting into the rabbit hole. It's very hard. look at the story through a news source you trust. Also, TinEye is a good reverse image search, so check that out. But the most important part I emphasize with them is, does it make you feel angry or wrong? Or do you feel like there's something wrong? And if it makes you feel angry, it's probably designed to do that. So then the last points I really try to leave with them with this discussion is the answer slow news, and to try and slow yourself down from sharing, and how can students do that, and try and verify things. And I talk about making the haystack smaller. That's the function of the library. So it wouldn't be crazy to bring a news source you really want to share to a librarian and asking them to help verify this. That kind of thing. So I bring it up in the context of kind of source interrogation, this issue, and the resources at the library. But the major connection I try to make is the rise of the anti-vaccination movement. And we talk about that, and I say, I say to them, how does this lesson that I am teaching you give way to the anti-vaccination movement? And they've struggled to make any connection. And the connection for me is that the people who have decided not to vaccinate their kids against all scientific findings, they are the educated people. They are the people who are sitting in my class when I'm teaching about fake news. And what is happening is that my class, giving them this lesson on fake news, can lead them to be cynical and not trust anything, and dig and dig and dig until they find something, a kernel of something. And that's, for me, the vaccination problem, is that you've got increasingly educated people who have been bitten by, I guess, by this, this culture of fake news, and now they no longer trust their doctors or anybody else. So it's about differentiating the snake oil salesman from the scholar, and figuring out a way to do that. And that's how I teach it, and it seemed to go pretty well. Wouldn't you say? I think it went pretty well anyway. So that's it. That's my presentation on fake news with my students.
Thank you. Very interesting. It's yeah. Anybody has like a question? Anything came up during the chat box? Maybe no.
No, I don't see anything yet.
I'm always interested, like actually, in the question of when you talk about fake news, and that we try actually also to teach kind of a skepticism towards information, and actually then also how we can see that like at the end that they learned it, like the students. Can you say something about that? How that works best for you, Tara? Is there also maybe Jasmina? That's also like a question for you. Actually, I wanted to hear, because in a way that's like kind of an attitude change. And for me, it would be also like then to see, because many times we have like kind of skills that we show them, but many times the attitude is more like kind of a threshold that they walk through, and then hopefully they carry it over like to other courses. And maybe it's also in that context important to see how much time we spend actually teaching about those kind of fake news or kind of information evaluation. So
yeah, I mean, I think the danger is that we're actually unleashing cynics, out there who are and skeptical people who should be, but we're not teaching them that. I mean, I don't feel that I've been doing enough teaching them that scholarship remains scholarship, and that you want experts doing what they do. So you want somebody who's certified to fly a plane to fly your plane. And in the same way, you want an expert who has looked into all the issues about vaccines to tell you what you should really be thinking about with vaccines. And so, you know, in that sense, you know, your professors and your librarians, I say to the students, are the experts in this field. So you need to not lose, you know, your passion, not look at everything cynically, but try and make the haystack smaller. And I go back to the haystack metaphor a lot in class, to try and suss out what are the better sources and the worst sources, and not engage in sharing. And you know, this came back to roost just 2 days ago, or a few days ago, in class with the revelation in The Guardian that the Black Lives Matter movement website was a fake. And, you know, it had 700,000 followers, double the amount of the real Black Lives Matter website. So, you know, I think helping students to see how this really filters into reality throughout the class, but also encouraging them to shift their attitude to be, you know, to look carefully, but also figure out who their experts are and ask for credentials, you know.
How much time are you spending on this as far as class periods? Is this over a week of meeting with them? Do you have the one library class as well, or is it kind of an ongoing
I mean,
thing?
I do fake news for one class, but I use it as a touchstone and go back to it a lot.
Yeah.
So it's the one class that sets us up for everything. And it really is taught in the context of source interrogation in general.
And is there something specific either you or Olivia would do that brings about the aha moment? Like, oh, they're really getting it now. You know, the first few assignments might be a bit dodgy, then they may not understand everything, but is there something that comes up through the semester that you're like, no, yeah, it's clicking now?
No, I think that what I would say is I require them to sit down with a librarian to suss out their sources for their big paper. I think that one-on-one time leads them to sort of a soft aha. Realizing that it's not just Professor Keenan that's being a jerk about this source. It's also, you know, a librarian who would say, ooh, I'm not sure about the source. You know, I mean, that's the thing, is they need to realize that there are accepted sources in the scholarly world, and it's not just the professor who's trying to make your life hell, you know?
Thank you.
And no, I was not present during this specific class session, so I don't know how it went. But I feel that sometimes the students now have more problems when they find sources on the web rather than recognizing the famous popular scholarly sources. So they get what scholarly means, but they don't see if a source is trustworthy when it comes from the web, because everything on the web might be interesting, and they don't get if there is something off that source. And especially with very recent topics cannot really find scholarly sources. And I get that a lot with communication students. So I don't know if Jasmina, well, she works in communication, so I don't know if she gets that quite a lot, because I find that students have a really difficult time understanding which are the sources that they could trust. So that's really unbelievable. It's surprising.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add, actually, let me show my face to people. Aha. Okay, so I really think, like in my case, what we call communication skills, they're actually like, you know, composition and rhetoric courses with a oral communication component as well. And the students, you know, they have to, by at least, you know, the highest level course, be able to produce a good, proper academic research paper on an original topic, etc. And they always get lost in the sea of sources. And even if you tell them, please try to use as many peer-reviewed journal articles as possible, they will go back to old habits and they will go back to the internet. And even on the internet, when you tell them, okay, if you're going to go for more popular sources, try to stick to the, you know, the ones that are really well known, etc. They will still sometimes get something completely obscure, you know, and use it. And I really think this kind of skepticism that Tara was talking about is really important. And it's something that I try to encourage, not only when I talk about, you know, fake news, but also when I get them to see popular sources, because not all popular sources are equal. An article, you know, from the Daily Mail is definitely not on par with, you know, an article that you'd find in the Atlantic, for example. And to make them also aware of the biases that are inherent in all news and in most sources as well. And to be able to identify these biases and these prejudices and the agendas even, that be it a political or economic or social agenda that is behind that particular source. What I found actually quite interesting, I mean, I actually share with my students the Stanford study that Tara mentioned, but I never do it the way that Tara does, as a kind of like wake-up call. And I really like that kind of wake-up call. And I think wake-up calls are really important, especially since I think most students see themselves as being, you know, savvy, being digital natives, being people who know, you know, what's happening online, etc. And I think in this world that is more online than ever before, they really need to be, I think, far more picky. And even, you know, I think the main problem is, even if I look at my Facebook newsfeed, I see so many people with even PhDs who are sharing fake nutrition news, who are sharing fake, you know, political analysis or whatever. And it is worrying. And this is why I think that, you know, it's a responsibility of all of us, not only librarians, but faculty members, to really, you know, be part of this, you know, drive for proper information literacy.
Yeah, I think oh, sorry. I think it's important for us to think about also how we do it with that wake-up call mentality. Like, they need to be caught out thinking the source is okay. They don't need to be publicly humiliated about it or anything.
No, not at all, of course.
You know, but a little drama really helps hammer home how many times they have shared fake news. You know, when I asked the students, when I found out about the Black Lives Matter thing, and I came into class and I said, how many of you shared a Black Lives Matter post? And they all raised their hand. And I said, okay, you know, most of you probably shared a fake thing. And here's the deal, I did too, you know? And so constantly saying we are all part of this, you know, and with this little drama of letting them get taken in the beginning. So not talking about, like, I deliberately don't talk about fake news until that lesson. So that they get taken in, so that they feel like, oh, wow, even I could fall for this.
Anyone can, yeah.
I have a question for Tara, if I might.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jorge Sosa from the AUP Library. Thank you for the content that you both have shared with us. It's really interesting. I actually teach information literacy. We have in my classes, I have never addressed fake news, you know, essentially as you have, and I think it's very important given it's something it's so common now. And so I'd like to ask you, you've said if you land in a specific unknown an unknown site, you Google its name next to fake and then see what happens. Can I ask you what happens?
I
It
sometimes
flashes you. It flashes and tells you, wait.
you know, sometimes Snopes will come up and say this is a fake site, you know, and sometimes it won't. So I mean, the thing is, I guess what I want with that slide, what I want to say is you're triangulating information. There's no one way, there's no one database that will tell you what is fake, what is not. But it's important to see what happens and then make an educated judgment. I think a lot of students today are, and we are the reason why a lot of them are doing this, but a lot of them want to be spoon-fed. And so we spoon-feed them. And we all do. And so we give them templates. And if they follow the templates, they're going to get an A, and you know, that kind of thing. And oftentimes it works. But with source interrogation, there's no template. There's no database that will tell you this. So yes, Google the site, Google the word fake, and see what comes up. And if reputable sites are saying there's a problem with this, but they have to know what's reputable. So it's a lot of times it's about getting to know the sources in their field that are reputable. And how do they do this? Ask a librarian, ask a professor, you know. So that's it. It's about engagement and triangulation more than you know, that spoon feeding mentality of like, here are all the good sites, here are all the bad sites. Anything on JSTOR is going to be great, right?
Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome.
I hope that you're going to come to Kyrgyzstan, go to Kyrgyzstan. Are you going? No.
Oh, I was going to go. No, I went to Talix, and when I got back, my forgot how to be potty trained for 2 weeks, and I just couldn't. I can't go through it again. She needs me. She's just very clingy right now, and I just want to be a mom and just say no. So I really wanted to go, but I can't.
But be a mom. She deserves it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question right here. When preparing like a little bit for today's webinar as well, I was reading like a couple of articles about fake news, and I came across like also like different terms like boot, like troll factories, like. And I was wondering to what extent, like in your teaching, are you bringing up like these kind of information, this kind of concepts or like new ideas about or how things work out in communications and the information landscapes? Is that something very essential to the whole thing for the students to get an understanding of how to deal with information, how to relate to information? Yeah.
I guess I would say that as they come up, I bring that kind of stuff into class, sort of media ecology points. I mean, we kind of have the media ecology guru at John Cabot, Antonio Lopez. So I'm a bad person if I don't bring him into the academic conversation. But you know, I do try to bring that stuff in. It's, you know, the thing is, I'm also, you know, doing advanced writing, and that's kind of the focus of the course. It's not a communications course, and most of the students I'm teaching will take at least one communications course. So I know that they'll get there. With some of this type of stuff, but I do bring it up as it comes up. Yeah.
Like in my case, because I always prompt my students to define fake news, because you know, if you Google fake news, you've got multiple definitions, and you know, many of them overlap, and when they're defining fake news, they come across things like troll factories, etc., etc. and they bring it in to their own work. So it's quite interesting to see that, you know, they're actually being active agents in their own awareness about fake news, which I think is quite key.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay, thank you. Does anybody, I'm not following the chat box. Do we have some other questions in the chat box maybe? Somebody wants to, Olivia, no?
There was Krasi mentioned something about how to know whether Snopes is a good website to verify news. And Ivana says that we cannot say that it's a good source. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I've used it, and I know that many people use it, but I don't know who runs it, and maybe Jasmina does.
I don't actually know who runs it, and I have used it and I share it with my students even, but I've always had this massive question. And when I did a quick Google search a while back, and there's actually a lot of controversy about
There
fake
is,
news.
yeah.
What is the agenda behind it? Who's really running it? You know, what are they trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. So this also adds to the conundrum, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I'd rather not share that with my students to confuse them even more, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
To me, I think if we at least, you know, make them good fact checkers who are willing to maybe have that more critical eye and would try to verify if information is true or not necessarily by going to Snoops or what have you, but by going to, you know, traditional research methods, shall we say, then maybe that can help. But it is problematic, and I understand the concern for sure.
I think that if we focus on the fact that we're trying to teach habits of mind, skills that they can use going forward in their lives, like whatever we teach them, you know, it has an impact. So do we want to teach them nothing's true? You know, you're never going to win. It's always Russians out there, like, you know, doing these troll factories, whatever. No, we obviously don't want to do that, right? So what we want to do is to teach them this habit of mind of pausing, and that's why slow news, I feel like, is the way we can start thinking about this. Is deliberate, you know, questioning of things in a rational way, and identifying who the big sources are, who the heavy hitters are in their field. That's the key. And even they are not always going to be perfect. But at least this gives us some way to triangulate, you know, it's a habit of mind.
Yeah, I really like that about the triangulation and the habits of mind, of the mind. Also, like the source interrogation that you mentioned before. That is really like digging deep. I think that's something, because there's like lots of Snopes or fact check or PolitiCheck or whatever sites out there, and of course you can ask those questions as well about if they're valid or not, or if they're telling the truth, or they're maybe left wing against Trump or whatever. So students gonna make that argument most likely in class. So that's, I very much agree.
We have about 6 minutes left. The timekeeper is speaking.
I have well, one more comment. I taught a session not on fake news, but on how to find good, reliable news. So it was basically the opposite. And I talked a lot about bias, like Jasmina said, and I also focus on the bias that everyone already has. Because it's not just the sources that are biased, but we are also biased. So we tend to read what we want into the news. So that is another piece of the puzzle that we can add to all this big mess, I would say, because it's becoming a huge mess and difficult to read in its entirety. So I think that all these pieces must be combined somehow, and there's no single way to teach about fake news, about how to read and judge news. But I think that trying to teach the students how to use their mind to understand different types of sources, that is what it's most important. So that's definitely what we want to do.
I think it's also, to make it relevant to them, to teach in context that they can learn from. So for example, I always tell the story of being at this political meeting where I said to somebody, "Oh, did you see that this website of this high school here in Rome?" So it's like local, put up this announcement how proud they were that they had 100% real Italians, and that now Livia's freaking, right? It's one of the most prestigious schools in Rome, and they had nobody with disabilities. And they were really proud of this fact. And so the girl said to me, "Where did you get that information? Is this fact checked?" And I thought for a minute and said, "Oh my God, maybe I'm sharing fake news." Of course it was fact checked. It is true. It did happen. But we just pulled out our phones and quick checked it. And I tell the students that story to say, this is a real life situation where I thought maybe I was engaging in fake news sharing. And they cared about it slightly more because it wasn't way up here. It was in Rome, talking about picking a high school that, some of them have been to this high school, so they were like, wow, we couldn't believe it, so trying to get as local as you can and as contextual as you can, and also showing that you as a professor that teaches this are fallible. Is really helpful too, I think.
Which brings us back to the good old critical thinking and emotional intelligence.
Very true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anything else does anyone else want to discuss anything? I think we need to wrap things up. Michael, I know you said you just shared an article in the chat box. Is that correct?
I got the link, so I'm gonna send out the link if I have to find it actually. So
that is on Academic Search Premier if anyone has access to it. So it's easy to find.
Okay.
And I just want to mention briefly that last week, a couple of weeks ago, it was International Fact Checking Day. So it's kind of cool that the Poynter Institute made the second annual fact checking day. So it's and on their website they also have lesson plans and a quiz. So it's kind of fun to take a look at that. Michael, do you have the link that you can share? Maybe you don't.
No. But I think when I did also research for the webinar today, I did a search for LibGuides on fake news, and you're gonna come along a couple of them, and I can share that maybe in the longer maybe email. And because there's many people are concerned about that, and there's lots of discussion about this topic. So
another thing I thought about is to have them pull out their phones and just share the last thing they posted, and ask students to to volunteer what's the last thing you posted, and have the classes as a group interrogate it a little bit. That would make it pretty real for them to discover he was just sharing fake news, I guess you would have to plan, you would have to make sure somebody does, so you would have to pretend you just shared a piece of fake news and then discovered it, right? Just in case it doesn't come up.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so any final comments? Michael, do you have anything?
No,
Lydia?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think if we need to add anything else, Michael, you have an email coming out, but
Yeah.
we also have Connect that we
But
can
yeah,
post things on, so we can share it that way as well.
yeah. And a
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
big thank you to Tara and Jasmina for taking the
Yes.
time. Thank you. It's very busy at the
Bye-bye.
moment. So thanks a lot for joining us and for the interesting presentations. Many thanks. Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
All right.
Here we go. So,
Okay. Thank you so much, and we'll see some of you in a few weeks. Tara, good luck with your other priorities, and good luck with finals, everyone. Those are coming up too. So,
Okay.
all right.
okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Have a nice one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great to see you.
Bye.